City's consumer-facing real estate podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to Get Real KC, where we are overflowing with a passion for all things real estate. I'm Erik Juergensen.
I'm Jen Justus.
And today we have with us in studio realtor extraordinaire and owner of Kansas City Legacy Properties. That is a company that specializes in helping you deal with inherited properties. Eddie Van Buskirk. Eddie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's great. And this is such an important topic and a lot of reasons why people end up entering into the real estate market because somebody has passed and we've got property that we need to deal with. And it can be a complicated, sticky little wicket. So I think it's absolutely fantastic you've come to share all your knowledge with us.
Sticky wicket.
It's very sticky.
It can be. So first of all, let's get some background. How did you realize that this was going to be a focus that you found important?
Well, it's kind of a weird situation. I get asked this question all the time, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of just that guy that stumbled into it. It's really how it happened. I wanted to be in real estate. I didn't know how I was going to do it or what area I was going to be in, and I was listening to podcasts about all different subjects, real estate, investing, selling, agent-wise, everything. And because of that, I listened to one on probate, this guy's selling a program on probate. And so I bought it. I had not enough money to pay for it, but I figured out a way to pay for it, and it gave me some tools on contacting people who had property through probate. And at the time, my only thing was I'm going to buy their house. So when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. And I would just smash those nails all day long, even if they weren't nails. And so I talked with this lady, and I was like, her mom died unexpectedly at 62, and it was kind of a big shock for her. And so when I was like, hey, I've got an offer. I'll make an offer. Are you prepared to sell this house? Are you mentally and emotionally prepared to sell this house? And she was like, yes, I'm ready to go. Which wasn't the case.
Right.
She was not ready to sell the house. And it's a common thing that I see a lot is people are not emotionally ready to let go of that property.
It's funny because when they answer yes, that means they're logically ready, right? So the analytical part of them is like, yeah, that's the smart thing to do is to get rid of this asset. I don't want to maintain it. I don't want to, but yeah, the emotion side of it, wildly different. And people aren't always realistic with themselves about that.
Absolutely. And this lady, she wasn't ready, and she didn't want to take an offer. I don't exactly remember why she wouldn't want to do it, but then we went through the winter and the pipes froze. They ruined the hardwood floors. They ruined her mom's stuff that did have value. The amount of money she was going to get for the house now decreased. The bank started foreclosing on her, and then she was like, just give me what you can. Like, whatever works, I'm going to take it. And now after that situation, I was like, there's got to be a better way to help these people, and kind of hand-holding to step them through a process. And so that's when I was like, let's create a tool belt for people and have screwdriver and pliers and all those different things to help in different situations so that we can step people through the process one piece at a time until we get it to where we're ready to sell the house.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that's fantastic. And we talked a little bit before, and we'll talk some more here just in general about, what realtors' job is and then what it is they do to truly service their clients. And I think what you're describing here is, and we should get into some of these things that people don't think about, and they don't think about a realtor, or maybe I should say a great realtor or the right realtor can help them with some of these things. So let's talk about some of those things that, other than, yes, we need to put the house on the market, we need to get an offer on the house, somebody needs to lead us through all of that paperwork, et cetera. We'll talk about the P word here in a minute. Mm-hmm. But what are some of the other things that you at Kansas City Legacy Properties can kind of assist with that you've put in this tool belt?
Well, there's a lot of people want to do it themselves. And I think that's the biggest problem with trying to deal with an inherited property is doing it themselves. while they can do it, and it's something that most anybody can do, it becomes awful after a while. The excitement phase.
How many people can actually do that, though? That's what I really want to know, is because there's so many moving parts to when someone passes away, getting utilities covered, getting insurance covered, getting mortgage payments covered, keep going. And I'm going to guess that there's about 100 things that you probably need to do before you even get to contract, title, underwriter, yada, yada, yada. So how many people can actually do that themselves?
Well, that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah,
is that most
like,
people think that they can do it themselves. And so here's the biggest thing that I hear is people hear what I do and they're like, oh, I wish I knew about you 6 months ago, a year ago, whenever I was going through it, because they were trying to do it themselves and they didn't know all of those 100 things that they needed. And so they kind of fumbled their way through the entire process. So that is... Can you repeat your question again? Because
so what are some of these things that aren't necessarily just the sale of the house that you guys can help with or do help with overall in the process? Like you're talking about do it themselves. Well, part of what that is going through and figuring out what to do with, we'll just say mom or dad's stuff. Right?
Those are like the obvious things. What's to do with the stuff in the house? That's like an obvious thing. Like, first thing that I always tell people to do is change the insurance, because when a property becomes vacant, if it's over a certain amount of time, just because you're paying the homeowner's insurance that was set up for the house doesn't mean that that's covering it now that the person's deceased and no one's living in the house. So I always tell people right off the bat, hey, have you talked to your insurance provider about this? And they're like, well, I never thought about that. And second thing is, this might sound silly and almost ridiculous, but I tell people to change the locks and change the garage code.
Yeah.
You don't know who has that information.
That's a great point.
And that could be, you might be like, well, I'm locking out my brother and sister. Well,
depending on how things are
exactly.
set,
sorry to tell you this.
Things go crazy.
There is a lot of times people call me and they're like, my brother or sister took... gun collection, coin collection.
Doesn't even have to be the brother or sister. It could be the aunt, the uncle, the cousin. You don't know.
The neighbor.
Yeah,
Oh,
the neighbor.
yeah, the neighbor.
Maybe somebody's coming in to help with cleaning. Maybe maybe medical personnel if they were getting stuff at home. I've been through this, and we can sort of utilize my experience. When my father passed, it's been quite a while now, I did it myself, and we can talk about some of the good things and the bad things. But I'll let everybody know right off the bat. I took 2 weeks off of work, and this is all I did, 10 hours a day for 2 weeks to dismantle the house, to, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't have any family drama. And it was exhausting.
Yeah.
It was, and at the end of 2 weeks, work is like, okay, well, you're back. Hope you're, feeling better. Sorry about your father, all of that. And I'm like, I can't even see straight because, so.
You're sleep deprived.
Yeah.
That happened to me too when my mom passed away. And if I just had to handle the real estate side and some of that, you're right. The level of emotion when it is someone close to you that has passed is a different level. And I was, for example, up at 3 and 4 a.m. and the neighbors texting me, Jen, I see the lights on in the house and your vehicle out front, and it's 3, 4 a.m.
And then you texted back, what are you doing up?
Okay. She's a cop, so she's shift. So I'm like, yeah, fine. This is just the time that I had to go through all of this stuff that I needed to go through, So that was the worst part for me, was going through all the things. Like, ugh.
Yeah, it's all the things. People don't really realize how much stuff can get packed into a house in 30 plus years.
Well, we've talked about this, right? The average American household has over 100,000 unique items in it. So,
it's a lot.
And for somebody then who's been living there a long time and has,
every holiday, all the paperwork, all the kitchen stuff that now is not relevant because nobody goes through their cabinets.
Right. Well, and then you add, I'm not.
Silverware from 1965.
I still have it. It's silver plated stuff. So
I do too.
Yeah. So, but it's
why I don't know.
And I don't even consider myself a horribly sentimental guy. And so the people that are sentimental that are going through this, I watch them.
Painstaking.
It's brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'd mentioned this earlier with the first lady I helped, is that when somebody dies unexpectedly, it is way more of a shock to people. So it is a much harder thing for people to let go of something that might be relatively simple or almost seem like trash, but for them, they're letting go of the last thing of that person, or when this is done, that process that they're letting go. So it's part of a grieving process that people are going through, and really tricky to navigate appropriately and be sensitive to as they go through this. So not trying to rush it all and be like, come on. Like,
when are we going to get this on the market?
Oh, trust me. My dad was like, come on. It was too fast for me, but it was.
Right. But
he's dealing with real estate. Time is money, right? So depending on who's involved, and that's a big piece, I think, to Des, is how many people could be involved, who may or may not have to sign or do things or give approval. I mean, that gets so complicated sometimes, because that's been, and people have different agendas, right? Like my dad and I had very different ideas about when we should sell things, when we should be rehabbing things, how long I should have to go through things versus let's get a 40-yard dumpster and clean this out, because that's what I've done to every flipped home that I've done for the last 40 years. That's how he does it. And to him, he just compartmentalized it, and this was no different. And this is what we were doing. I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes.
Yeah. And so those are big issues that you, as you are getting someone to help you, you need somebody to give you good, solid advice, but then to sort of understand, as you're saying, every situation can be a little bit different.
Yes. Every single one of these is different. There's no like cookie cutter plan that somebody gets that's like, here you go. We'll just do the exact same thing every single time. And so it makes it difficult because you've got a different number of people involved. You've got a different, there might be a mortgage that needs to get paid every month, and you might not have any assets to pay that out of. So, and nobody can pay it themselves. There's a whole lot of tricky things that go into this that make it, either time sensitive, we want to grieve, but we don't have the luxury of grieving because otherwise we're going to lose the property, and that becomes a scary reality for a lot of people in this situation.
There's no cash assets. Nobody has the financial ability to pick up the extra house payment. Now we're under a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to navigate. And then we're going to talk about this here in just a second, but then as Jen mentioned, there's the whole legal side of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of an interesting thing as well, because, let's I'll put the P word out there. Let's talk probate. And so, give us a definition of probate.
Okay, here's my definition. This is like just really simple.
Right.
If you don't make a plan, somebody else will make it for you. In this case, it's the city of Kansas City's probate judge will make that decision for you. So
it could be the county if it's within the county.
Oh yeah, the county, the county of Jackson County. Thank you.
Or Clay or Platte.
But you go into probate even if you have a will. Correct?
Even if you have a will, yes.
So you can go into probate with a will or without a will, which is called intestate.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to avoid probate is to do the pre-planning.
Pre-planning, have a lawyer draft it up. It doesn't, people think it's really expensive. $2,000 to have peace of mind is really...
And attorneys walk people through this really well. So for people that have a lot of properties, putting them transfer on death, bank accounts, whatever. And the attorney, they have really good checklists to help you get through that process. And it is a little bit time consuming. That was probably the biggest thing after my mom passed away, is since my dad had a surviving spouse, that makes things a little easier in a lot of ways. But if somebody passes away and somebody does not have a surviving spouse, and then we're dealing with heirs and there's no plan, we've got time constraints, problems, publishings, all kinds of things that come with that. And it's really, the attorney can walk you through that checklist and save you so much time, because on the backside, if someone passes away without a plan, it's a whole lot more time. We're talking about weeks, whereas you could just set aside a week and maybe go do all of this stuff.
Well, so
then be done with it.
Let's break it down a little bit. And so, because, let's face it, when somebody, we don't tend to, in our 50s or 60s, is typically when I think Americans start thinking about it, but frequently it's into the late 60s and 70s before they start doing this kind of planning. Obviously, we're going to find people that are doing it in their 20s and 30s, but So if somebody dies unexpectedly, dies young, or, just because, the son or the daughter or the niece or nephew, whoever it may be, thinks this is a good idea, doesn't necessarily mean that the person that would have to actually do it, right? So the older person, again, these are generic, if they don't want to, it's not going to get done. So people are going to be in positions where they have to deal with probate. And so let's go from like the hardest case, and then we'll kind of come back up. So let's talk about probate intestate, which means that somebody has passed on and they own, doesn't depend on what they own, but we're going to talk specifically about real property, real estate. And there's no will, right? So this immediately has to go to probate court. Probate's a legal process. And so depending on what jurisdiction you're in is which court deals with it. And the first thing they have to establish, if I'm not mistaken, and you'll know this better than I do, is who are in fact the heirs, right?
Who are the heirs, and then from that, the judge will decide who will be the executor of the estate.
So if the executor, which could be named in a will, and without a will, the judge has to make that decision. And
then isn't it the county administrator that can become that person?
Yes.
Yeah. So each county, was interesting to me before I really dug into politics. I didn't realize what that person actually did. And so I have learned like these different people get elected to office, and then they are responsible for kind of administering these probates. And maybe I'm not using exactly the correct terminology, but they're responsible for these things that come to the county where maybe they don't have heirs, or maybe they don't have somebody that's capable of mentally being in charge of an estate.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I've dealt with the one in Jackson County. His name's John Killian, and he has a very specific system set up for all of those that come in and a way of liquidating it. I'm not exactly sure what they do with the money. I've always been curious on what happens with the money.
When there's no heirs?
When there's no heirs and they sell a house, like... Where does that money go? So it's always been kind of a head scratcher on that. But we'll
leave that one right where it is.
when there are heirs that are identifiable, the judge could also appoint an heir and executor.
Correct.
It doesn't have to necessarily.
I don't
be
even know. Does it always have to be an heir?
It does not have to be somebody who's like physically related to them.
Right, and they can appoint lawyers, executors also. Can't
they can appoint a lawyer. They could appoint a neighbor,
that was very close to someone that has an inner working knowledge to be helpful potentially. Yeah, that's very good information.
And then once an executor is established, that executor theoretically has some oversight, but they've got a lot of control.
They have a lot of control, but they have a lot of responsibility, and a lot of people don't know. I'm not sure if they don't know this, but they can get compensated for their role. In most cases, people don't. They do everything, like a lot of heavy lifting, and then split it evenly. And it doesn't quite make sense to me with how much work they have to do. But
I have heard that complaint from relatives. Like, for example, one of my cousins, her mom passed away, and I helped them through that process. And at the end, the brother was very upset because he had provided a lot of the money and done a lot of the heavy lifting, and he had to split it 6 ways. And he could not believe the little amount of money that he got that he had to split all those ways.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because they're not always negative like that. So when
6 people is a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. So it's just
could have been $1 million though, and it would have been a different story though, right?
Just to give a nice story, when my father passed, it's just my brother and I, and my brother technically was the executor, but he didn't live in town where my father lived. And my father ran a business out of his home as well. So I, as I mentioned, took 2 weeks off, dismantled the business, did all of the things that you have to do. And there's a litany of them that I won't even remember, but we can go through some of them. I mean, even simple decisions like, how many death certificates do I need to order? Or just, it's nuts. But then what we agreed and when it came to splitting the financial assets that were there, was the first thing we did is we took 2 weeks off the top and paid my salary, right?
Yep.
Because like, hey, you took 2 weeks completely off work, and I know you burned the vacation, but I was actually working as a contract software engineer at the time, so I didn't even get paid for the 2 weeks. And it's just like, yep, no, we're gonna compensate you for doing all of this work, and it was probably more than my salary.
Yeah.
And then we're going to start talking about dividing assets. So sometimes people can recognize how much work that is and be willing to deal with that.
It's interesting how greedy people get, though.
Well,
Death does funny things to people, and my dad and I were, and my dad ultimately was really in control of when my mom passed away. And so he was very generous with me. My brother's a different animal. So he was very generous, but in reality, it was 100% his.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And he was in charge of 100% of everything, 100% of the proceeds, in which we had a different piece where an attorney tried to jump in because he was just sure that my nephew was wrote in that will. Well, no, he wasn't. It was 100% my dad. It always was.
Right.
But my dad compensated me as the realtor, as the person that was, getting that. But we had the family in, and it wasn't a lock situation. But I'm going to tell you that we lived to regret letting them come in the house after and kind of have the pick of the way, because they turned on us and it was ugly.
And you see, and I changed the locks the day he died.
Yeah.
I called my friend.
Well, and
up.
they didn't come back in. They didn't have any keys or anything. We were just in the first week. We were being generous, and that's our spirit, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you that we live to regret that decision because they turned and then expected more than they were entitled to quickly, and the relationship is still very strained to this day. And my mom, unfortunately, she killed herself, and that happened in 2017, and we still have a strained relationship here all these years later.
Oh, wow.
So,
Sure.
I mean, and
it's
it's
a lot of
just
emotion, and depending, no matter how
death
somebody
does strange things, because we had always been very close up until that point. And I mean, 30 plus years of my life that we were leave it to beaver family, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to tell you, it ain't no more leave it to beaver friends. So
I've seen brothers
I'm
and
sure you've
sisters
seen more
stab
than
each
me.
other in the back. I've seen.
I thought you were about to say stab each other literally. I'm like, well, oh my
no,
goodness.
not like that. But
well, thank goodness, because in this day and age, we never know.
one of the people
I can't wait for his craziest story, Eric.
Yeah, but one of, this is up there probably, but one of the people, we had gotten a contract for their house, somebody to buy it, and then they couldn't provide a clear title or they needed enough, like all the heirs to sign it. And
right.
Some of them didn't. So then like a month went by and she was like, no, everybody's on board. We're good to go. I can, have the title company. We'll get the paperwork and we need to. Well, after we close the property, we get a phone call from an attorney who says, this lady forged the signatures of all of her family members took it was $23,000 for the house. So it was like a pretty rough house.
Right.
But, 23, they each got like $5,200 or something like that. But they wanted that $5,200. So
Sure.
Anyway, she forged all the signatures, and
Good Lord.
it was pretty ugly. But
That sounds ugly. Woo-wee.
Well, so this will go into we.
That's another thing. I'm big on preliminary title reports on death.
Yeah.
I send that over to. That's the first thing I do when I sign my exclusive with whoever the client is I get that address over to title, and I go, hey, let me run interference on this beforehand, because I've ended up with people with employment liens and things that the spouse had no idea was there. That's a whole difficult conversation, isn't it? Just got this title report, and we have $324,000 of employment tax liens. So we're a little upside down in this venture. Do you wanna start digging into this? Anyone?
the other thing is, when it's transfer upon death, like they were like, oh, we did a transfer upon death to my son Michael, and then he's going to distribute it. Well, Michael had, so many liens attached to his properties,
right.
And then they automatically went on to this property, and now to settle this estate, they need to pay it out. If they want to sell the house, they need to pay it out.
That's how I ended up with the property next to me.
Oh,
is because the boys that inherited it had, get this, and employment tax liens come to haunt somebody else. It was like I had our trusted title partner run that. $1.3 million in liens.
That's crazy.
She said she's never seen one that high before. I hadn't either, to be fair. It was just like accumulation of this and that and the other. So did we say this was complicated?
Well, so one of the things that I'll point out, right? I mean, obviously,
not everyone's like this either, though, to be fair.
Yeah, if you're calling Eddie or Jen or I, we're going to do this. But if you're not, for whatever reason, talking to one of us when you're dealing with inherited property, one of the first things a great realtor is going to do is figure out or help figure out, because it might take a process, of who actually owns the property.
Yeah.
Right. And
who needs to sign? Who needs to do that? One
of my policies that I do, and I think we all at the table do, is that whenever we're dealing with couples, particularly couples that are getting divorces, is I don't communicate with just one of them. I mean, I might answer a text from one of them, but my emails always go to both. Right. Here is exactly what's going on. Here is, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, who are the decision makers?
Right, but more importantly, who's legally vested? So, because we'll do that. We'll have a couple say, "Well, my wife's taking care of it," and I hear that from like the spouse, either spouse, and that's fine. You're still getting copied in the emails, and so in this situation, once the actual like legal ownership is defined, then all your communication goes to whoever that is. And if that's a group of 5 siblings, then they all get the emails. Now, it makes it harder on me because then I'll get 5 different sets of questions potentially and all of that. But that's the right thing to do, is to keep the owners involved in what's going on in the process.
It's, that's very important. Sometimes when there's like seniors involved, it's kind of hard, especially when like if they're a care facility or knowing who to communicate with effectively, that's going to get that information.
Well, and how often have you had to help, we'll call it children of seniors, help them go get power of attorney and that kind of stuff?
Most of the time that's set up.
Is it? Okay.
By the time that I'm involved, it's already set up, so I haven't had to.
But it's certainly something you would check. Right?
It is something. And
do you have power of attorney? Can you send me a copy? If not, here's a lawyer. It's real easy. Go get it done.
Yeah, and I've been. This is the exact same process as when somebody goes to a nursing home or a care facility, and so I've been helping a lot more people who they find themselves in that situation, and they're a power of attorney's usually already, been chosen, and they give me that information right away. So it makes it a lot easier. But the process is still the same, and the family still has to go through all of it, especially if the care facility is like, "Hey, you need to sell everything to get your cover or part of the coverage. Sell it. We're going to use that money to pay for the stay, and then when that's out, we're going to go to Medicaid or Medicare."
Right. That's a part of the process. Well, just real quick, so people are curious, there's 2 types of powers of attorney out there. There's durable power of attorney, and I am not a lawyer, but just to make this somewhat simple, that's the medical side. So if the person is incapacitated and can't make medical decisions, you're given permission to make those for them. And then the regular power of attorney, which I think actually has a name, I forget what it's called, something power of attorney, but most people refer to it as regular. And that's the ability to make, financial and other decisions.
Yeah, there's a full power of attorney, I think. I'm not sure if full was the word, but it just means the blanket of everything encompassed. And those can be for a specific period of time.
Or a specific thing, or they can be generalized where you're legally allowed to make decisions for that person. And as you are dealing with people that are significantly aging, becoming incapacitated, having dementia, memory, any of those are things you need to have discussions with them very early on, because if you wait until you're in the throes of them not being able to make a decision, they're a little bit harder to execute.
And those are things that the trust attorney could set up for you.
Absolutely.
As part of that estate plan, they will get all that lined up so that in those situations, you would have that person already identified.
Okay. Let's circle back to probate for a minute. And this really wouldn't matter whether it's with a will or without a will, but there's this whole thing of figuring out who the executor is going to be. The executor then is figuring out how to appropriately dispose of any assets, sell houses, sell cars, et cetera, working with any heirs to try to make all of that work. But the court has to actually understand so the court can oversee all this, does oversee all this. There's lawyers involved.
Scary.
And the court has to understand what that person's assets are. So I've run into this particular situation with helping someone is that the attorney, the probate attorney, provides the court a list of all of the assets that this person owned. You know, maybe they owned a couple of properties, a motorhome, a car, whatever it was. And then we go to sell a property and we find out that the attorney didn't actually put this particular home on the asset list. So now you have to go back as a realtor. And this was like my first foray into this really deep. And I'm like, here I am calling probate attorneys going, and then eventually the court, like, how do we get this asset listed on the probate list so the court will approve? Because the court had to approve the sale.
Yep.
So we had to have it under contract, and then it had to go to the court through the lawyer, where a judge says, yes, this is an acceptable sale, because it was a supervised probate. And so, yeah, kind of messy and
Takes more time.
I certainly did not think when I signed up to be a real estate agent that I would be like helping people navigate their learning and helping them navigate about probate law.
Do you want to explain what supervised means?
I can, or you can. Which one do you want?
Well, you brought it up, so I figured.
No, go. I mean,
so if a property or if a probate case is supervised, then you have to take a property, get it under contract and then take it to the probate court and say, hey, I got $100,000 for this house. And they get to say, yes, that's an okay price to sell that house for, or no, that's not an okay price. And that becomes very tricky in a supervised situation when there's a lot of deferred maintenance and they're going based off a drive-by, like look at the yard and look at a few comps around the area, but the inside's a total disaster.
Yeah.
And so you have to prove what the
value
inside,
is.
what it's going to be.
We were required in this particular case to pay for an appraisal.
Yeah.
And get a full appraisal done. And then it was pretty clear, essentially don't sell the house for less than this percentage of the appraisal. Now, we actually sold it for over the appraisal, but that all of that are now steps that have to be taken. It was more cash out of pocket from the executor/heirs who weren't in a financial position to continue to shell out money. So it was very tough on them. And by the way, the executor was out of state. She was a wonderful person, and I'm very glad I got to be able to help her. But yeah, supervised makes it even harder.
Yes.
And we didn't even talk about, Jen alluded to, when they're establishing heirs, when there's no will, there's this whole thing where are they still just doing it in the paper?
Publish in the paper, isn't it? I believe it's published for 6 weeks.
Yes, it takes. It's a lengthy process if you have to publish and
essentially saying, hey, so and so has passed, and if anybody has a claim,
we were in the process, and this is a long time ago before I was as familiar as I am with it now. But we got the house under contract the first time, went through title, and got kicked back essentially that we were going to have to do the publishing. And she was a surviving spouse, but apparently he had other children that were unknown, and this somehow got discovered, which then forced us to a different process. So we had to contact a lawyer and go through a different process because the lawyer she was utilizing was not familiar enough with this particular, publish errors outside of what we knew previously. Everything else cost us the first contract because of timeline.
Yeah.
And so we went back, finally got it under contract again, had the publishings for the 6 weeks, came back, and were able to finally get all of this worked out. But woo-wee, that was a tough one.
Yes. I've actually just had one very similar to that.
Yeah.
The surviving spouse had never met one of the children that this gentleman had.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a good time, not a good time.
And that child's mom was listed on a title from 1971.
Yeah.
So it made it's actually still out there because it's pretty sticky.
Yeah, it does result
I've
in
run into that situation
court,
also.
Publishing, attorneys, and then anything with the legal system moves so slow.
Yeah. I mean, just so.
just not a fast process.
If we haven't painted the picture already, we're painting it for you that your realtor can help you. They're not lawyers, they're not et cetera, but they can help you. But there's a ton of moving parts here. If we haven't convinced you to go actually do some estate planning,
maybe that's our next podcast. Probably won't be our next, but maybe we get someone.
The thing I say all the time is like, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah, that's a wonderful saying. I love that.
That is the motto for my business. It's like just a few things, like even not necessarily an estate plan, but just write down all of your passwords and your banks and your institutions that you have, 401ks and life insurance policies and all that information that somebody might need if you die, so that it's in one spot, and keep it in a safe, like a safety deposit box or somewhere that they can get it and they know that it's there.
Make sure they have a key to the safety deposit box. That's one of my dad and I's things is like we go visit the safety deposit box and do these different things. And we do this about every 6 months. He goes through things with me. And I love my father for that because he really just wants to make sure I have a good understanding of everything that's going on. And I know not everybody has that luxury, but I should probably do a little bit of that for my husband. Just quite frankly, if I'm being honest, I'm not perfect at it.
And like the modern version of that is a password vault. So that's what.
But they got to have the password to the password vault.
And so I quiz my wife like 3 times a year. What's the? Because she makes me do all this stuff, and so I'm like, all right, what's the main password? And then you can see all the accounts we have. You can get into them, et cetera, et cetera. So.
That's a great tip, though, Eddie, to tell people to have all of that in a secure, safe location, whether it's a safe deposit box, whether it's a safe, and then make sure somehow you have communicated that, because I feel like communication is really a solution to so many things. Really, it is. So in this case, it's a solution to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's jump real quick and pick up one more topic before we close out, and that is taxes. So, and we're going to, again, none of us here in the room are tax experts, but we certainly are around taxes. And I think there's a concept that people can understand about inheriting property, about basis that they can understand. So let's talk about a situation that maybe is a little bit nicer financially, where you've inherited a property that has a pretty significant value to it. And now you've gotten through all the things you need to get through, and the house is on the market and you're selling it. So now there's this chunk of cash that's coming to either you or you and the heirs to split. And it's a pretty significant amount. So the real question is, do I owe taxes on all of that?
So in like as far as like a property capital gains,
capital gains, right? So
a lot of times people won't have a capital gain because of a step up in basis.
There you go.
When you inherit that house, you get to inherit it at today's current market rate or what that would be. Now, where somebody would run into an issue of a capital gain is if they hold on to that property for a period of time, and it goes from today's value, or let's say 2020's value, and they are selling it today. We saw a lot of rise in the...
they're up 10-15% there. Yeah.
So they're going to have a gain on the difference between what they inherited at and what they sold it at today.
So let's break it down into real numbers. So I inherit a house today, and the value of it today is $300,000. If I sell that house right away for $300,000, I have no tax burden, because it essentially came into my ownership as if everything's clear for that $300,000. If I hold on to it and
it goes $400,
goes $400, then I am going to owe capital gains tax on the difference between when I inherited at $300 and what it is today, $400. Is that correct?
That would be your $100,000 gain.
That's your $100,000.
Okay. So really clear to
And by the way, thank you, realtors, for saving us, because let me just tell you that this was a piece of the tax code that really got challenged in the last 5 years. When the Biden administration took over, this was one of their targets originally, was to have some type of, we'll call it an inheritance tax.
Yeah, I'm sure it was labeled a death tax, I'm sure.
Completely annihilate people inheriting properties. It would completely annihilate them, because we've already talked about how many people do not have the financial means. And where this becomes a big issue is with a lot of these farms. Some of these farms have become worth a lot of money, and had they had to pay the capital gains on that basis, it's life-changing and devastating for people that are inheriting property. We're not trying to push them down further. So thank you, realtors, because that was something that I fought hard on personally. Made a lot of calls to people in Congress, made a lot of calls to Washington, D.C., visited Washington, D.C., and talked about how devastating, and told them the stories that, how this would really just annihilate people that were inheriting property. So just a side note, just have to throw that in.
You inherit somebody's property and they don't have a lot of equity into it, and then you're getting tapped for capital gains. Oh yeah, it would
On
be
top of that?
It'd be impossible.
That. And then a big problem with inherited properties is reverse annuity mortgages. I mean, that's another topic for
another day.
Spend
but
a whole day.
Hey, let me just say, don't get a reverse mortgage.
No.
Don't get a reverse mortgage. And I'm not, doling out a lot of advice, but I'm going to tell you that I have yet to see a situation where that worked out positively.
I agree.
Yeah,
reverse mortgages
we probably
are
should break in a podcast, break down the nuts and bolts of those so people understand how they work, because I know that they can sound attractive, but yeah, I don't know a whole lot of people who've done them, but the few I've done, it has not worked out as wonderful as they have hoped it would. So
no.
Hey, Eric, can I bring up a topic?
Absolutely.
So something that's very big with inheriting houses, getting rid of the stuff that people have to, and families, I typically see families go in and they start deciding what to do. If they want to keep stuff, that's great. It's their stuff. If they're going to separate it out, that's fine. But if they are just starting to do it because they're like, oh, well, I guess I'll take this and I guess I'll take that. Well, if you take too much stuff, there might not be enough stuff for an estate sale company to want to even look at your property.
Then
now
you're going to be calling 1-800-GOT-JUNK.
Yeah. Now you're paying money to get rid of this stuff instead of the estate sale company giving you money to take it away. So that's something that I caution people on is be really
mindful.
Yeah. When you're taking stuff out, be mindful. Do you need do you really want it? Or is your kid's going to be throwing it away when you die? That kind of thing. But the other thing is, people just start throwing away stuff. They'll just be and they get trigger happy.
That's my dad.
And they throw away a lot of value. Things that they don't think are valuable at all. And then,
or they just don't care to mess with it.
And
that's my dad. It's not that he doesn't think it's valuable. He's like, I ain't got time for that.
And if that's the case, that's totally fine. But a lot of people, then they're like, okay, come in and take a look at what I have. And I was like, well, where's all the stuff? Well, we threw away and this is what we left. We left the furniture. Well,
the furniture's not really worth
Nobody
anything.
wants a dining room set with a curio and a hutch anymore. Nobody has china. Nobody has a dining room almost anymore. So, I just say, don't throw anything away. Just let somebody else who's a professional come in and look at it first, because there could be a postcard or stack of postcards. Postcards are very valuable actually right now. There's a lot of collectors.
Pro tip, everyone, postcards.
So before you just start throwing away paper products or whatever, they have an expert come in and look at what you have. These are really no-brainers, but gun collections, coin collections, silvers, real silver, not
and
the
gold.
silver-plated stuff. We sold a silver set for $1,900, a silverware, actual silver.
Oh, good. I've got one. We need to talk afterwards.
Okay. Having somebody come in and take a look at some of those unique collections. Now, Precious Moments, I'm sorry to tell everybody, those
Beanie Babies, they're out.
They're
Barbies. I think there's probably a few Barbies.
Hummels have still kept their value.
Yeah, Hummels have, but
Hummels, what the heck are those?
Yeah, well, they're the real Precious Moments made in Germany, and they've been around for 1,000 years. So yeah,
I don't even know what a Hummel is.
Yeah.
I must be.
Yeah,
I'm younging myself. I'm
Yes.
not aging myself.
That's
I'm
right.
younging myself.
but I'm just saying, don't throw anything away.
Have a professional
even
come
clothes, even clothes. People just donate all the clothes. If you had a 1970s AC/DC t-shirt, that's $40-50. People pay that kind of money for old vintage clothes.
True vintage.
Yeah.
This is good. This is good advice because I think, and I'm confident I was guilty of that. That at some
Me
point we just look
too.
at it, take our own understanding of value, and make those decisions. Like, oh, trash, not. Oh, it's an old raggedy T-shirt or whatever. And I know a handful of things that have kept value just because I'm old, but I don't know it all. I wouldn't have known the AC/DC T-shirt. Not that my father had one, but
I actually haven't run into an AC/DC T-shirt yet, but vintage clothes. There's a lot of people who want those things, and they get thrown out so quickly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say something, and I forgot.
No, that's all right.
There's so much.
Yeah, there is. There's just a lot to unpack. No pun intended.
The other good thing about inherited properties for buy side is that you could get into a house that you probably couldn't afford otherwise because of an inherited property situation. Now, you're going to have to probably put in some sweat equity and stuff like that, but it's a great opportunity for buyers out there to get into a house that maybe they wouldn't be able to afford or a neighborhood that they wouldn't be able to afford otherwise. And I love selling inherited houses just to see people who get them because they're like, oh man, I love this house. Yes,
The nostalgia.
It's a little bit the wallpaper over there is killing me, but
right. Frequently, they're not mistreated; they're just dated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's
there's a lot of
that's
those,
a
yeah.
different level of DIY than a house that's been just mistreated and not maintained. All right, well, we're going to run out of time here, so we have to get to, and I'm expecting a whopper, so I'm maybe setting you up to fail here, Eddie.
Whopper.
I apologize, but
Big fish on the line.
That's right. Give us the craziest situation you've been in doing this stuff.
man, I've really been racky because like every situation's kind of crazy in its own respect. So this isn't one that I actually dealt with, but she called me thinking that I could help. I get a lot of calls from people after the fact when they get robbed or whatever. Hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me do this? And so I was in a local newspaper out in Grandview area, and they wrote an article about what we do. And this lady called me up and she goes, can you help me? My cousin, who's a Mensa, stole everything.
Whoa.
Are you familiar with the Mensa?
Super intelligent people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I wasn't familiar with that at the time when she tells me that. And I was like,
What?
okay, start over. And she goes, my dad was dying and my cousin convinced him to write me out of the trust and had it done right before he died. And so she was like, my cousin paid off this attorney and he did this and he did that. And my dad used to work for Walton, Sam Walton.
Walmart.
And they had a house over in Westwood. Isn't that the
Westwood.
Woodside area?
Yeah.
And so she's like, he wrote me out of the will. Then when my dad died, he filed a restraining order against me and kicked me out of the house and didn't let me go in to even look through the stuff or get anything out of there. And then she was like, but he gave me $700,000. And I was like, well, isn't that good? I mean, $700 seems like a lot of money to me.
$700,000?
Yeah, $700,000 is a lot of money. And so I was like, well, what'd you do with that? And she was like, well, I used it to fight him in court to prove that and so she spent all of the $700,000 trying to fight her cousin and lost. So I don't know how much money was in this estate, but if you get $700,000,
You might just...
might just be happy with that, but I'm curious to know how much was actually in the estate.
I'm sure she was crushed, but oh man.
Yeah, no.
But if it was all I's dotted, T's crossed, and I'm sorry, if you're not Mensa and you're going up against one,
yeah, well, I mean,
they're geniuses, man.
Anybody who's got it figured out, anybody who's has access to the information that can piece it all together can, the thing that runs through my mind in that moment is the challenge has to be, did Dad sign the paperwork of sound mind?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure that's where her lawyer's challenged, but it's a shame, it's a shame that somebody feels entitled or somebody is evil enough, but we all know it happens. Right. And so this is part of why, I think every one of us at this table and anybody really recommends, hey, get your house in order, go get an estate lawyer, figure out how all this stuff is going to get transferred so none of this happens, so that you're not, leaving an ugly legacy behind.
Yeah.
Right.
That's absolutely it. And our new slogan at Kansas City Legacy Properties is we want your inheritance to be a blessing and not a burden. And by doing these small things, it can make it a whole lot easier for everybody else involved.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think this is super valuable information, and I'm sure our listeners are really hopefully taking something away from this today.
So, Eddie, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do it?
They can give our office a call at 816-307-7163. They can reach out to us on the internet at kclegacyproperties.com. And we are also on Facebook at Kansas City Legacy Properties.
Excellent. Fantastic, folks. That's Eddie Van Buskirk, the owner of Kansas City Legacy Properties. Eddie, thank you so much.